Hey guys, what's happening? So let's talk about Spawn for a minute, because aside from the news with Jamie Foxx being casted to play Spawn, in a film that's also directed by Todd McFarlane, the creator of Spawn, quite a few of you guys just been asking for me to do stuff on Spawn, period. So for that reason, this video is gonna kind of be a hybrid between movie talk, a quick run through of his origin, and also a few of my predictions for what the storyline could be. Because from what we know right now, which is mainly the information that's been shared with Deadline, and quotes from both Todd McFarlane and Jamie Foxx, and from what we know right now, the film is just gonna jump into who he is. And if you go back to the first few issues of Spawn, that's exactly how the story was told, which is a brilliant choice of delivery in bringing this character to an audience of people who do not know who he is. Because as a kid, aside from your favorite creators having their own publishing and making their own characters, and to be honest, that was one of the things I appreciated a bit more when I got older. But as a kid, what excited me was the same thing that started me in reading comics back in 1991, and that was seeing artists like Jim Lee, who is the reason why I started reading comics, period. But to see his amazing work with a fresh new take and an amazing fresh new storyline, like, I was very much hooked into Image Comics early on. And they were stacked with talent, man. They had Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, Eric Valentino. Man, Rob Liefeld with Youngblood, you can see the influence that he brought to X-Force coming over into Youngblood. And some of you guys may be too young to remember, but back when action figures were the thing, Image had the best action figures ever. I had Chapel, I had Maul, I had Spawn, of course. Like, no other action figures in the 90s held a candle to the Image action figures, hands down. Like, man, I really wish I still had those. But either way, getting into Spawn's origin. So like back in 92, when we were first introduced to Spawn, as soon as you opened that book, he was Spawn. But his memory was very broken, he didn't know who he was. And because of that, this series started as a journey as us, the reader, going with him, figuring out who and what he was. And once he found that out, we took a step further with the character, figuring out what choices he would make with this newfound power. And within the first few issues, with him having different interactions, pieces of his memory would come back to him. And eventually we found out that his real name is Al Simmons, and at one point he was Special Forces for the US military, but because he was so good, later he was promoted to more of a secret ops organization to where they would carry out assassinations, but they would do so for the American government without having the US name involved with these missions. And pretty much these guys, they did the dirty work, which in turn was a benefit to the United States, but the method of execution was very questionable. And it was because that Al started to question some of the morality in the work they were doing, in the orders they were just taking and executing. And him asking these questions is what ultimately cost him his life. And at the time, his superior, Jason Wynn, who would organize these strikes, he viewed Al questioning him as a threat more than anything. Because one, Al was his best soldier in the field, and if for any reason Al were to go rogue and turn on Jason and the rest of the NSA, Al Simmons could likely pull it off. And it was for that reason that Jason Wynn had Al's closest friend in the field kill Al in the middle of one of their missions. And this takes us over to Bruce Stinson, aka Chapel. And when I say close friend, I mean more so professionally, because I'm gonna talk about Al Simmons' best friend in a little while. Chapel was more so like his guy in the field who he trusted to have his back. And that was mainly because aside from Al being the best, Chapel, he wasn't too far from him. But it was for different reasons, because Chapel, this guy was ruthless. Like, if you thought Killmonger was bad, like if you take a Marvel comic and you take Killmonger and hold him next to Chapel, Chapel makes Killmonger seem as hard as cotton candy and wet toilet paper. Like, this guy is no joke at all. And like, the best comparison that I can think of to like just give you an idea of the level of craziness of this guy, if you've seen Dead Presidents, or if you haven't seen Dead Presidents, the character that Bokeem Woodbine played, like when they went to war together before they came back to the States, that would probably be the best comparison to how crazy this guy is. Like, if you have not seen that, you've definitely got to check it out. That film is a classic. But either way, Jason Wynn gave Chapel the orders to take out Al Simmons on their next mission, and as a result, Al was burnt alive and sent to hell, where he made a deal with Malboja, giving his soul in exchange for an opportunity to come back to Earth so he could be reunited with his wife again. And that essentially is how he became Spawn. But when he came back to Earth, it was 5 years later. And this is one of the things that I liked about Spawn, the movie, back in 97. Because in the movie, the way they depicted this time gap, it was like both his fall and his ascension, both falling to hell and ascending back to Earth, it's like both of those trips each took 2.5 years. which is insane. But with the time gap, it lands perfectly following the source material and him returning with 5 years having passed. And people can say what they will about that movie, because for whatever reason, as time goes by, people get amnesia and they say, oh, it wasn't all that. But I will never forget the feeling of seeing his mask wrap around and cover his face for the first time in live action. And yeah, of course, the cape was a little bit over the top at times, but it was like that in the comics as well. And for people who talk down about the older Spawn movie, like people like that will never understand films like Terminator 2 or Back to the Future Part 2. And to them, they'll never understand like the magic of both digital and practical effects that took a chance and really opened the doors for the films that we watch today. Like, I feel like those people will just never get it. And Spawn came out years before The Matrix. But either way, let me not get that started. But with Spawn returning 5 years later, and over the course of time remembering who his wife Wanda was, by this time she had married his longtime best friend, Terry Fitzgerald. And Terry was his friend like for real. Because you know, you got like co-workers and then you got real friends. Sometimes two in the same, but Terry was definitely that real friend. Like, they were close. You would think that they were brothers. But at this point for Spawn, realizing who he was and what his life was like before all this happened, soon after we're introduced to the Violator. And it's through the Violator that Spawn finds out about the deal with Malebolgia and what his deal that was made consisted of, which was pretty much being Malebolgia's greatest weapon in the soon coming war between heaven and hell. But also with Spawn meeting Cagliostro, who at one time was a Hell Spawn himself, he was able to help Al Simmons make his decision on what he wanted to use his newfound abilities for, whether he wanted to fight for heaven or whether he wanted to fight for hell. And Cog, he was just kind of like, yo, well, for me, I just chose neither. But the addition of his character was very significant to the story, because when Spawn refuses to serve Malebolgia initially, and the Violator pretty much transforms and violates him, if the Violator was the only voice of explanation, you would think that Spawn had no choice but to follow Malebolgia. But with the addition to Cog presenting another option for Spawn, and showing Spawn that, well, maybe everything that the Violator said wasn't all truth and written in stone, because the Violator would have had him to believe that anybody who refused Malebolgia, he would just destroy and that would be the end of him. But that in its entirety wasn't the absolute truth. But that's what the Violator wanted Spawn to believe, because he just wanted to extinguish any glimmer of hope that Spawn had in making a decision that was anything but being a soldier for Malebolgia. But as far as what we know about the film at this point, like, all they said is that Jamie Foxx has been cast and that he's playing Spawn, and they did also mention that Todd McFarlane and Jamie Foxx have been talking about this for years, like 5 years. But even still at this point, we don't know what route they're taking with the specific story. We do know when we hop in, he's gonna be Spawn already, but we don't know how long he's been Spawn, and I hope that this time around that they get Chapel in the movie, because actually seeing Chapel go against Spawn, that would just be epic. And at this point, we really don't know if he's gonna be in the film. We don't know much about the plot, like I said, but with Todd McFarlane both writing and directing this time around, I feel like we got a much better chance of that actually happening. But along with a lot of the news that we got from Deadline and Collider, like, they're also saying that Spawn won't be speaking, and I'm not sure exactly how that's gonna work. I'm thinking more that the film will be narrated by Jamie Foxx, and we'll see everything go down more like the telling of a story, because I just don't see Spawn like not speaking at all. Perhaps being a guy a few words, yeah, but like just not speaking altogether, I don't know. That's just one of those things that we're just gonna have to wait and see. Personally, I think it'll be the route of just him being a few words and most of it being narration by Jamie Foxx throughout the film, because Todd McFarlane wrote this script with Jamie Foxx in mind from day one, and it's been some time coming. And this is really the perfect time for this film, because more recently with Kingsman, and then when that came out, the Deadpool footage leaked, and then about a year later we got our Deadpool film, and even more recent with the wild success of Black Panther. Like, right now, all the stars have aligned for a Spawn film to be relaunched. Like, the audience in its entirety, like not just us the comic book fans, but the people, like the general public who don't know who Spawn is, never read a comic book. Like, all of these films that we've got in just the past 10 years, they've really just been warming up audiences to see this hardcore, this Todd McFarlane uncut, well, not completely uncut, but this true Todd McFarlane Spawn film that I believe will be just as impactful on the big screen as it was on the pages back in the early 90s. Because Spawn is a badass, man. He's immortal, he has that necroplasmic energy that looks awesome, and he can use it as a blast or create different weapons. weapons. His cape is like the cloak of levitativity on steroids. It's ridiculous. But let me know you guys' thoughts down in the comments below. How do you feel about this Spawn movie taking another step forward? Are you excited, or do you kind of have this fear of the George Lucas Star Wars episode 1 through 3 kind of thing going on? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll do it again next time. Alright, later.